Welcome to today's Explainer. If you've ever wondered how a continent of diverse indigenous nations transformed into a single global superpower, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're going to treat this a bit like an undergrad history seminar. We're going to synthesize tens of thousands of years of North American history into one cohesive academic survey. It's a massive undertaking, for sure, but we're going to break this complex timeline down into clear, digestible historical movements.
Okay, here is our syllabus for today. 1. Indigenous origins and colonization. 2. Revolution and early republic. 3. Expansion, division, and war. 4. Industrialization and global emergence. 5. The Cold War superpower. And finally, 6. The contemporary era. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. Indigenous origins and colonization.
Now I want you to look at this number, 575. That is the number of federally recognized tribes today. These are the direct descendants of indigenous societies that occupied this land for literally tens of thousands of years before the English ever established Jamestown in 1607 or the Pilgrims landed the Mayflower in 1620. So it's absolutely crucial to remember that the history of this land is vast, extending way before European contact. And when we analyze that European colonization, as historians, we really have to look at two simultaneous realities. On one hand, you have the devastating genocides, wars, and epidemics brought to indigenous peoples, and on the other, you have the establishment of this rigidly profitable agricultural economy. By the 1760s, the 13 British colonies were established, and the southern colonies specifically built an entire system relying entirely on slave labor, enslaving millions of people brought over from Africa.
Moving right along to Section 2, Revolution and Early Republic. The ultimate fracture with Britain escalated incredibly fast. Just look at this timeline. In 1773, Parliament ended colonial self-governance by imposing taxes and the Intolerable Acts. Boom, that sparks the Revolutionary War at Lexington and Concord in 1775. By 1776, the colonies formalized their independence, leading to a military victory recognized by the Treaty of Paris in 1783. And finally, in 1787, delegates signed the U.S. Constitution, which, as a quick side note, actually remains the oldest long-standing written and codified national constitution in the world. Pretty remarkable.
What's also wild about this early republic period is just how quickly the newly formalized government, under guys like Washington and Jefferson, looked to expand its territorial footprint. Just over a decade after the Constitution was ratified, President Thomas Jefferson negotiated the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. He literally doubled the physical size of the nation overnight, completely setting the stage for massive westward movement.
Which brings us to Section 3, Expansion, Division, and War.
So, the real engine behind the internal fractures of the 19th century was manifest destiny. This was that intense belief that settlers were destined to expand across North America. It drove a massive project of settler colonialism, it led to the annexation of Texas, fueled the Mexican-American War in 1846, and just opened up vast new Western territories. But, and here's the kicker, this expansion immediately sparked bitter, existential contention over whether slavery should be legal in those brand new lands.
And as we know, that contention boiled over. When Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860, Southern states seceded to form the Confederacy, sparking a devastating civil war. 50,000. To put that staggering number into perspective, that is the number of casualties at just one single battle, the Battle of Gettysburg. It stands as the deadliest battle in American military history, and it marked a grim but absolutely critical turning point that ultimately led to the Union's victory in 1865.
Now, while that Union victory and the subsequent Reconstruction era brought the abolition of slavery and brand new constitutional protections for individual rights, the backlash was severe. By 1877, political power in the South shifted right back, and a systemic era of voter suppression and Jim Crow laws was established by white Southern Democrats to maintain white supremacy.
Okay, Section 4, Industrialization and Global Emergence.
During the late 19th century, what we call the Gilded Age, the arrival of millions of immigrant workers basically turbocharged rapid industrialization, making the U.S. the world's leading industrial power. But all that explosive economic growth brought widespread dissatisfaction with corruption and inefficiency, and that led to massive social pushes known as the Progressive Movement. We're talking sweeping social and political changes here, the creation of the federal income tax, the direct election of senators, citizenship for many indigenous people, alcohol prohibition, and crucially, women's suffrage. And this next quarter century, it's just a total roller coaster. The nation goes from ending its initial neutrality to jump into World War I in 1917, right through the economic high of the Roaring '20s, only to crash incredibly hard into the Great Depression in 1929. That massive economic despair required the huge relief programs of the New Deal, which carried the country right up until the shock of Pearl Harbor pulled the U.S. straight into the massive global theater of World War II in 1941.
Which launches us into Section 5, the Cold War Superpower.
This is where we see a massive historiographical shift, a true dawn of a new global order. See, historically, the U.S. leaned heavily into strict isolationism, avoiding major global entanglements at all costs. But post-World War II, the reality changed. The Truman administration firmly pivoted the country away from its isolationist roots. The U.S. helped found the United Nations, anchored the UN Security Council, and really cemented itself as one of two dominant global superpowers alongside the Soviet Union. But because direct conflict with the Soviets meant mutually assured destruction, which nobody wanted, the Cold War was fought in the shadows and on the fringes. For nearly half a century, the geopolitical landscape was defined by this terrifying nuclear arms race, the technological sprint of the space race, intense propaganda campaigns, and of course, devastating proxy wars, most notably in Korea and Vietnam.
Domestically, though, this era forced a real reckoning. The civil rights movement of the 1960s was a monumental domestic shift. It finally challenged the nation to address those systemic inequalities established way back after the failure of Reconstruction. It forced the implementation of actual social reforms to enforce the constitutional rights of African Americans, like voting and freedom of movement, rights that had been actively suppressed for nearly a century.
And finally, we arrive at Section 6, the contemporary era. Our recent history has been heavily defined by consecutive, paradigm-shifting crises. The September 11 attacks launched the global war on terror, fundamentally altering how we view national security. Then, the Great Recession from 2007 to 2009 severely tested the economic foundations of the country. And most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic from 2020 to 2023 profoundly shaped the modern socio-economic landscape in ways that, honestly, we're still trying to fully understand today. This modern era really forces the U.S. to navigate highly complex and often controversial global military involvements. From the recent withdrawal from Afghanistan to interventions supporting Ukraine against the Russian invasion and ongoing military entanglements in the Middle Eastern crises, including the strikes during the Iran-Israel war in 2025 and 2026. The geopolitical balancing act remains incredibly dense. Yet, even amidst all these earthly conflicts, the legacy of that mid-century space race is still alive and well. It's fascinating how this drive for exploration persists, right? Ambitious new frontiers are currently being charted with the Artemis program in the 2020s, with a very real, tangible aim of creating a permanent base on the moon. So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want you to look back over our entire syllabus. We've traced a line from ancient indigenous societies through a violent and revolutionary founding, deep internal division, all the way to immense global power. So the question I leave you with is this: how do the nation's foundational ideals continue to be tested by contemporary global conflicts and internal domestic challenges? Does the past merely inform our present, or does it actually dictate the future? Class dismissed, and keep exploring.